Good morning. We're going to be putting a case for inclusive education today. The team that's going to be doing it is Professor Jackson, Michelle O'Sullivan, who's a teacher and a parent from Esperance, Andrew McDonald, who's a parent from the city. And Mr. Videro, of course. And Tony Videro, who's got a long history with PLEDG. I think we said 1981, he did his first prac with me down in Bunbury as I think the first social worker that went through UWA? Yeah. Sorry? Curtin. Okay. And so we're going to basically just be telling some stories about inclusion. We're going to be giving some of the research about inclusion. We're going to be looking at what various aspects have to say. Now, in front of you, somewhere in that pile of things, there should be some dot points. And I put together a dot point thing to try to make sure that we could cover all the things that needed to be covered in this sort of session. The core considerations we hope to address are that choice requires information to be informed choices. That treatments that your children experience from the time that they're born and have been identified of having some level of impairment have histories, and the structural habits that we've developed may or may not be developmental, that there are other sorts of ways of addressing this. And it's our contention that we need the right structures, and that these structures need to be built on right principles and then right relationships. And those right relationships need to be between parents and teachers, teachers and EAs, and funders, and all the various players. And we're not so certain that we currently have the right structures, but we're certainly a part of a group of people that have worked very hard to try to put the right structures in place. Another consideration is the research, including the latest research, which in terms of the brain science, may or may not support some of the past, current, or possible alternative models of how we treat the physical and social and curricular needs of vulnerable children. And as you can see, many of those points are in your dot points. There are models of treatment other than the developmental model used in the treatment of delayed development, and to make an informed choice, we need to know what model is being explored. So one of the things that I try to work with families is to try to figure out what is the model underpinning what somebody is suggesting to you to do. Is this based on medicine? Is this based on child development? Is this based on management of your child? Being three core models. Okay, and I'm not going to go over those at this particular point in time. But this all bases quite a bit on the notion of individual difference in humanity. That there are, how we treat people can be predicted by the social judgment that people make about our individual difference. And as we all know, we have a huge array of individual difference. We have small people, tall people, short people, fat people, skinny people, all ranges of colors of people, and all sorts of different individual differences. But one of the things that we haven't often really been made conscious of is the fact that some of those individual differences are viewed positively by society, and very positively, particularly tall people. Being a short person, I can tell you that I know that taller people are more positively valued. And the shorter you get, the more negatively valued you tend to become, to the point of being labeled and maybe called names as a child. But those are just an array of the normative distribution of difference across humanity. That social judgment doesn't have anything to do with who the person is inside. It has to do with the habits, and from the brain science point of view, the brain's perception, which controls reality. And I look at these as historical habits, that we've passed forward habits from one generation to the next generation to the next generation. And I call that the collective unconsciousness. So the individual difference in humanity might be seen by management by label. And here's one that I got from Dr. Jackson: a desire to give them the education, and so a consequence to propose the same goal for them is a dangerous chimera. Who was that psychologist, do you think, talking about? To desire for them the same education as you would give others is very dangerous. People with disabilities? Ah, yes, you all know this one. This was given by the founder of social psychology on the education of women. Now, what's the reality of that? Is that true? And this is a dangerous, dangerous proposition to this group, I can tell you. Is that true? Is it true that women learn slower than men? Is it in actual fact the opposite true? Okay. I think the research, and Dr. Jackson will maybe confirm this for us, is that women develop quicker than boys. They develop quicker, all the way at least into their 20s. And who knows whether we ever catch up with you. But that doesn't make a difference, does it, in terms of how that social devaluation or how that social perception has been created? And what's one of the notions that we face because of that social creation? What are women right now pushing really hard to break through? The glass ceiling. So we even have labels for some of these sort of concepts, that we've had this notion around for so many generations, and yet still, with all the science, with all the knowledge, with all the true factual information, the way that that was particularly early framed set in motion a differential treatment that didn't have reality as its basis. And so in this, if we perceive impairment as special, our contention is that we'll create special structures, special places, with special tools, with special people doing special things to special children. And that the notion of special has created a mindset for us to think that we need to do something different. But if we look at it differently, if we perceive impairment as a typical part of the range of humanity, our special structures and tools and doing special things doesn't seem to fit. So the first step on the road to inclusion for us is to see children and not see their labels. See the humanity in the children. So risks associated with label-based management are these. Labels create fear of the unknown. Labels can create differential treatment that's not based on the common need or their belongingness. Viewed by others as a stereotype of the label cements fear, which reduces then their chance of belonging, because people will move away naturally from things that they fear. It creates a limited view of the child and the difference of not their similarity, and the emphasis then becomes on fear. Is the child broken? How does he or she learn? Now this then flows on to another piece, which is then the child may then begin to take this on themselves, because they're in a culture that's giving them messages about who they are, and that leads to probably one of the most painful aspects of segregation, and that's rejection, when you don't feel that you belong. Another aspect that we see in our education systems is that kids learn helplessness. They learn that they're treated differently, and so they test. And I'm sure if you're parents, you have all had this experience where your kids are constantly testing and testing. What are the rules? Because the rules aren't the same for your child, and so your child continues to test those rules over and over again. And it's not because they don't know, it's because the rules are different, and they have to test the edges of what those rules mean for them. They act to test differences, and that creates fear then sometimes in others, or a lack of knowledge. The struggle with the self-image, who am I, the need to belong, for having a self-view is missed, and may view themselves as broken, and that they don't belong, and that's a horrible state of affairs. So what we're going to propose to you is that the adaptive response we hope to cover are one's will to include, precedes learning the skill to include, becoming familiar with the personness in the child before learning the impact of the impairment. So this doesn't mean that we deny impairment. We believe that the child is impacted by all the various different impairments that they can experience. But underneath all of that, and more important in that, is the personness of who is this child, and that the child is where we need to be focused. Learn this through the eyes of parents is one of the lessons that I've spent my whole career being taught by parents such as Andrew and Michelle. That we look at them and to see what are the nuances of the impact. What works and why does it work? Which we then go to the science that Dr. Jackson gives us. Work together to create physical, social, and curricular belonging and participation. three basic layers: physical presence, social belongingness and friendships, and curricular belongingness by participating in the activities of all the other children, rather than specialness. And then learn about what works from the science and what effect size means. And I'm sure that Dr. Jackson will cover that one. So these are the major ingredients that Bob and I put together in about '96, somewhere like that. The core pieces of inclusion, which are physical, social, and curricular, broken in two halves. One affects the child's image, another affects the child's skill. Those skills are relevance and potency, and an image in the eyes of others, an image in the eyes of the child themselves. And then the big piece is expectations, having normative expectations and having high expectations, not special expectations and low expectations, which is the norm. I think I had about 10 minutes to try to cover this. I hope I have.